All right, I've got 10-10. So why don't we get rolling again? Got 68 people in this work group meeting. It is really nice to see everybody again. Thanks for making the time today, and hopefully tomorrow as well. So yeah, I just wanted to take a second to welcome everybody back in sort of this live mode. And I believe, Jenna, when you're ready, we can roll the intro video for this work group whenever you're ready. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the 2022 NECAFS annual meeting and the Produce Safety Work Group. We thought it would be helpful to refresh everybody's memory about what we talked about last year and a little bit of what we're going to be doing this year. So you may remember that last year we started with a slightly different approach than previous annual meetings. And we did that thanks to the input from our regulatory partners and the fact that we at that point had a year's worth of inspectional experience. And what that led to was a slightly different approach to our annual meeting, which was informed by observations from the year of inspections. And so what we're starting to do is develop a new approach to the annual meeting, and specifically the Produce Safety Work Group part of the annual meeting, which is informed by regular review of those observations, pointing to key issues, produce safety issues on farm. So we've taken the same approach this year. The regulatory partners in the NECAFS have gotten together in a pre-annual meeting, one-day pre-annual meeting, and talked about some of the key issues they're seeing and summarized those to lead into this part of our annual meeting. We're going to take the same approach that we took last year, which is to use those issues and to drive the agenda for the Produce Safety Work Group. We're going to do something a little bit different this year. Instead of looking at an expansive list of issues in lots of different breakout groups, we're going to take an approach where we all look at a common issue that's come up. And this year it's worker training. And it may not be exactly what you're thinking it means right now. There's a lot to it, and we're going to unpack it together and really have space for everybody to bring their perspectives to it. The point of all this is that it is a shift in how we approach the annual meeting, but we think it's something that will lead to really sustained action and development of relevant and meaningful resources and collaboration that really help address the issues that continue to show up on farm and specifically during inspectional visits. So as a reminder from last year, the 2020 breakout groups, the information coming into that meeting included the top 5 misunderstandings that were observed during inspectional visits and the top 5 non-compliance issues. And this framework was important to the regulatory group to have this difference between misunderstandings and non-compliance, both important but different. And you might remember that the breakout groups were driven by these 3 key questions. What's happening, what's it look like, and why is it happening? What's missing that needs significant attention? And this was an opportunity for those who weren't involved necessarily in the pre-meeting regulatory summary to offer other perspectives and maybe areas that or nuance that weren't previously captured. Start to then identify what should we do about the issue, the needs, or the barriers. And lastly, we wanted to listen to this group about to get a sense for what should NECAFS, and specifically this annual meeting, as the one time a year where we all get together, what should that look like going forward? And we presented a rough outline of what we had heard up to that point for review, and it really does sort of capture what we started with this morning. You know, the provide an opportunity to regularly identify key produce safety priorities, starting with a survey of partners annually to identify those priority areas, including having our regulatory partners provide a summary of what they're seeing on farm. Provide opportunities for focused breakout groups based on those priorities, And as we mentioned, this is going to be a slightly focused version this year. We're trying that out on one specific issue of worker training. Enable an integrated and interdisciplinary discussion. Again, that's the whole point of these breakout groups. We will have a panel discussion and a regulatory overview prior to the breakout groups, but the bulk of the discussion will occur in the breakout groups. And then coming up with ways for NECAFS to share the information across our network. Again, annual meeting is a great opportunity for us to share with each other and capture the work that's happening across the region to address these issues. And we're always looking for new ways of doing that as well between the annual meetings. So that leads us to the agenda for this year's annual meeting, Produce Safety Work Group. And as outlined here, we'll start with some presentations and project updates, again, to set the foundation for the rest of the day's activities, to include regulatory observation summary, a summary of projects and initiatives already underway, and then an outline of the day's activities. Those days' activities include regulatory overview of worker training. What's in the PSR about worker training? What's not in the PSR about worker training? And what nuance exists that we should all be thinking about and working through together. We'll have a break about midway for lunch and also the virtual poster session. We'll regroup with an inspector panel talking about worker training issues observed on farm to try to put some context to the discussion. How is this showing up and why is it an issue and what's it look like? We'll then jump into breakout groups with facilitators, which we're very grateful for, to talk about these issues together and to unpack it together and talk about the nuance and importantly, what can we do about it between now and the next annual meeting.
So actually, I'm going to jump in here because that was a pre-recorded video that didn't quite get edited at the end. So I apologize for that, but appreciate everybody going with the flow. So you're not quite up yet, Christina, don't worry. So thanks, Chris, for laying the framework and kind of just reviewing what we did last year. I do want to take a minute to just go back through and sort of remind people of this work group approach that we take and why we take this approach. So through collaboration, it is known that when you bring individuals together into a group, they bring all of their individual areas of expertise together to discuss a problem collectively. And because of that interdisciplinary approach, people bring their own areas of understanding, perspectives, and knowledge to a particular topic so that when you talk about it, it's more comprehensive and you can identify and develop tailored action that ends up being more appropriate, effective, and efficient in the long run. And so this is something, for those of you who've been involved in NECAFS for the last 6 years, hopefully you've seen this progression in the annual meetings where we started early on in creating relationships among everybody, which then allowed for trusting sharing of information. And last year, the inspectors brought their perspective of on-farm observations to the discussion, which then was informed by educational observations through on-farm through educational programming and visits. And those perspectives together in those work group discussions identified root cause issues that is resulting in or contributing to these particular misunderstandings and non-compliance issues that inspectors are seeing on farms. And so as we thought about this year's annual meeting, we thought, how do we take that discussion from last year, those really in-depth, heavy in meat and potatoes breakout group discussion, and move that needle forward toward collective action? And so what we're doing is we've chosen one specific topic, and that's the topic of worker training. And the agenda today is set up in such a way that it's a step-by-step process. So by the time we get to the breakout groups in the afternoon, hopefully the information has been laid out and presented in such a logical way that everybody is sort of hopefully on the same page and understanding where we are when it comes to worker training, and therefore those breakout groups at the end of the day can be informed by that total conversation and your perspectives and understanding and your individual expertise to inform and articulate action-oriented outcomes. And so the goal of the breakout groups isn't necessarily to specifically articulate an educational material development project, but rather articulate threads. Going back to Chris's knitting pun from this morning, identify threads that then a work group or a group of us can weave together to articulate some type of output that addresses worker training. And we may, in 12 months, see that we're revisiting this because there's questions that have arisen. I don't know yet, but that's part of the evolution of this work group. And so as I was talking, I was seeing heads nod. So hopefully this is all making sense. But the way that the agenda is laid out is first, Christina Sweet from the Vermont Agency of Agriculture will give an update and a presentation on the inspectional observations collected from across the Northeast from this past year. So you'll see that data. If you remember Leah Cook's from last year, and you'll see Christina's this year. And then from there, we'll hear two presentations from Shauna Henley and Laura Pineda Bermudez, and they will talk about initiatives that they've been working on when it comes to worker training. And then we'll dig into some of the actual inspectional perspectives for worker training and some of those particular nuances that they want to talk about. And then we'll move into those breakout groups. So the other housekeeping thing is that if you have questions during any of these presentations, please put them in the chat box. We will have time at the end of each of the sessions to facilitate questions. So please do use that chat box. We also will be able to unmute. Everybody's just in this Zoom room, so that you couldn't unmute, raise your hand and unmute and ask a question. But for the most part, we'll use that chat box. So with that, I will now turn it over to Christina Sweet from the Vermont Agency of Agriculture to present on the 2021 inspectional observations from the Northeast states. Thanks, Christina.